Parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, are you aware that hundreds of perhaps thousands of Texas voters are coming down to the Capitol tomorrow to watch the rules debate?
The chair is not advised.
Mr. Speaker, I move to postpone further consideration of H.R. 4 until tomorrow at 10 a.m.
Mr. Slaton, you would have to be recognized at the front mic for that motion.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I move to adjourn until 10:30 a.m. tomorrow in honor of the voters coming to the Capitol tomorrow on Thursday.
Mr. Slaton, you are not recognized for that motion.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Isn't a motion to adjourn a privileged motion?
Mr. Slaton, it is not a privileged motion.
Mr. Speaker, Rule 5, Section 24. Does that compel the Speaker to recognize members when they make privileged motions?
Mr. Slaton, a member has to be recognized from the front microphone to make a motion.
Mr. Speaker, will you allow me to make that motion?
You can come down front and we can talk about it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment simply says if you want to be a committee chairman in the Texas House, you should be able to affirm the obvious fact that there are two genders. It's sad to even have to say this these days, but the push from the radical left to shift reality.
Members, please take your conversations outside the rail. Mr. Busey, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, I raise a point of order against the Tinderholt amendment under Rule 11, Section 2 on the grounds that the amendment is not germane.
Please bring your point of order down front. Order against further consideration of the Slaton Amendment on the grounds that the amendment seeks to authorize actions prohibited by the housekeeping resolution. The subject of the amendment, as stated by the author in his layout, is to prohibit the Speaker from appointing certain members as certain chairs, specifically those members who are elected as nominees of an identified political party. The author additionally stated that the purpose of the amendment was to implement the directive of a political party's state executive committee. The housekeeping resolution adopted by the House earlier today codified the constitutional rule that House resources may only be used for public purposes and may not be used for political purposes. Attorneys General John Cornyn and Greg Abbott have both held that political parties are not public entities, but are political instrumentalities. Is that even a word? Sorry. The amendment would require a speaker to use public resources, including staff time and government facilities, on behalf of one political instrumentality. This obviously would require the speaker to violate the housekeeping resolution. Once adopted, a House resolution is not subject to collateral attack. The Slaton Amendment effectively seeks to amend the previously adopted housekeeping resolution, which is not permitted under House precedent. It may only be offered by way of direct amendment to that measure. Accordingly, the point of order is well taken and sustained.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Schaefer, what purpose?
Parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Are the House Republican Caucus and the House Democrat Caucus contemplated anywhere in our House rules or the housekeeping resolutions?
That is not a proper parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Does the Republican Caucus and the Democrat Caucus have office space in the Capitol that uses state electricity?
That is not a proper parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Is the House Republican Caucus a political instrumentality?
That is not a proper parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, members, this amendment is similar to one last session. What this amendment says is that when the Speaker selects committee chairs...
Mr. Guerin, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call a point of order against further consideration of this amendment as it's basically the same thing. It violates the same points that I initially called on the last amendment.
Please bring your point of order down front.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment would simply require that after the Speaker appoints committee chairs, each chairman must provide a written notice stating whether or not they support Marxism. The notice must be submitted to the chief clerk for printing in the House Journal. It's extremely important since our committees deal with the most important
Mr.
issues.
Speaker, I'd like to call another point of order against further consideration of this amendment. It is not germane to this to the rules.
Please bring your point of order down front.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment simply protects the
Mr.
use
Speaker.
of proper
Mr. Guerin, for what
pronouns.
purpose?
I'd like to call another point of order, as this is not germane, plus it would violate freedom of speech under the United States Constitution.
Mr. Guerin, please bring your point of order down front. For the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
To lay out the amendment, sorry.
Mr. Speaker, members, this is a redistricting amendment, and the amendment would require essentially that any redistricting bill which redraws the lines of legislative, congressional, state board of education, or court of appeals district must include in its bill analysis information that is designed to assess how groups that are protected under the Voting Rights Act are impacted by these proposed new maps. This includes all racial groups, as well as particular language minority groups in certain parts of the state. Unfortunately, Texas has had a long history of Voting Rights Act violations. In fact, there was a conservative Fifth Circuit judge that said it's notable as well that in every redistricting cycle since 1970, Texas has been found to violate the Voting Rights Act with racially gerrymandered districts. And prior to 1970, as y'all recall, in the height of the civil rights movement, you can imagine what the maps were like prior to the Voting Rights Act being signed. Last decade, the state was found to have first violated the United States Constitution in 2011, and then again in 2013 when it redrew House District 90. And what this comes down to is a pre-clearance provision that we previously had in the Voting Rights Act of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. It required that the state would demonstrate to the Department of Justice that the proposed maps did not have a discriminatory impact. And as we saw during the last redistricting cycle, we saw the impact of the maps on historically disenfranchised groups. And here's what we saw in the absence of pre-clearance during the special session. 95% of the growth, the population growth in Texas came from communities of color. Approximately half of that growth came from the Latino community. And despite the fact that Texas would not have gained 2 new congressional seats, we could have even potentially lost some. Both of the newly drawn congressional seats were Anglo-majority districts with Anglo-majority eligible voter populations. During the redistricting process, there was a mere 24 hours notice before the redistricting committee heard congressional maps. And so this amendment would ensure that the redistricting bills cannot just pass through, that we have really significant and important racial voting analysis. And here's the impact of the Texas House maps on the Latino population in Texas. For the Texas House, we saw a map that eliminated 3 majority Latino eligible voting districts. It also eliminated 6 districts that had a majority Spanish surname voter registration. And if you think about that, the impact on the Latino population in Texas, this is why we need the amendment. We need to be able to see the data and see what the impact is going to be on our community. During the special session, despite the fact that the Mexican American Legislative Caucus, a Texas Legislative Black Caucus, both requested to invite experts to come testify before the committee and explain to us about the impact of the maps and the proposed district maps and whether the maps would comply with the Voting Rights Act, they were not allowed. So this amendment is so crucial for us to determine compliance of new maps, to determine compliance with the Voting Rights Act. And there's a wide variety of data, but we would respectfully request your support for the amendment, and I move adoption.
The chair recognizes Mr. Hunter in opposition to the amendment.
Respect to my colleagues, this is a redistricting amendment that involves legal, and I would request no vote.
The chair recognizes Ms. Niave Criado to close on the amendment.
Move adoption.
The question occurs on adoption of the amendment. A record vote has been requested by Mr. Slaton. A record vote has been granted. The clerk will ring the bell. Shows Ms. Niave Criado voting aye. Show Ms. Morales voting aye. Mr. Reynolds voting aye. Mr. Hunter voting nay. All members voted. There being 64 ayes and 84 nays, the amendment fails to adopt. The following amendment.
Members, one of the big wins that we recently had out of the fight in Washington, D.C. is that motion to vacate the chair, a motion that previously needed 5 members to make it, now requires 1. This motion came from a Thomas Jefferson manual as what was enacted in Congress in 1837. We have an identical motion here in Texas to remove the speaker and elect a new speaker. We have 1/3 the members in this Texas House, yet we require 76 people. I don't anticipate this motion being made this session, and I hope it's not made in Washington, D.C., but this amendment moves it to 5. Washington, D.C., with 435 members is 1, and I'm requesting that you get 5 signatures to be able to do it. I move passage.
The chair recognizes Mr. Hunter to speak in opposition to the amendment.
In respect to my colleague, I'll be asking you to vote no. And again, our current procedures have been working well. Please vote no.
The chair recognizes Mr. Tinderholt to close on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This only occurs if a speaker won't recognize you. You need 5 signatures to have the debate. I want to be clear. It doesn't just vacate the speaker and you have to vote for a speaker. It's to have the debate. I move passage.
The question occurs on the adoption of the amendment. A record vote has been requested by Mr. Slaton. A record vote has been granted. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Hunter voting nay. So Mr. King voting nay. All members voting. There being 3 ayes and 146 nays, the amendment fails to adopt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is simply a transparency amendment. Texas is a big state with 30 million people, 150 representatives, and this will help ensure the people who are watching our proceedings at home can have a clear idea of all the representatives who are here in the Capitol passing legislation. This amendment required that the video broadcasts of House floor and committee proceedings.
Ms. Gonzalez, for a purpose.
I raise a point of order against the Slaton amendment under Rule 11, Section 2 on the grounds that the amendment is not germane.
Please bring your point of order down front.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment reduces the time limit for a vote to place on impeachment resolutions on the calendar from 30 days down to 7. Whenever the House deems it necessary to file impeachment resolutions, it must be treated with urgency, and it is perfectly reasonable to require that the Calendars Committee vote on it within 7 calendar days. I move adoption.
The chair recognizes Mr. Hunter in opposition to the amendment.
In respect to my colleague, I'll be asking you to vote no. Current calendaring and resolutions procedures are fine. Please vote no.
The chair recognizes Mr. Slaton to close on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'd like you to know before 1993, the calendar's rules for all bills was 7 days. I'm only asking for impeachment resolutions to be 7 days. I move adoption.
The question occurs on the adoption of the amendment. A record vote has been requested. A record vote has been granted. The clerk ring the bell. Show Mr. Hunter voting nay. Mr. Slaton voting aye. Mr. Burrows voting nay. Show Mr. Rainey voting nay. Mr. Kimball voting nay. Show Mr. Smith voting nay. Show Mr. Theory voting nay. All members voting. There being 7 ayes and 140 nays, the amendment fails to adopt. The following amendment, the clerk.
Mr. Speaker, members, this simply ensures that we'll be conducting our business in a respectful and proper order and importance and precedence by ensuring that we debate and take vote on the incredibly important issue of ending of drag queen performances in front of minors before we name a road or bridge in the state of Texas. Naming roads and bridges is a good thing, but I think we need to protect children from
Mr. Speaker.
being sexualized.
Mr. Moody, for what purpose?
Raise a point of order against further consideration of a Slaton amendment under Article 3, Section 5 of the Texas Constitution on the grounds that it violates the procedures and order of business of the House of Representatives specified by the Texas Constitution.
Please bring your point of order down front.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment simply ensures we'll be conducting our business in a respectful and proper order of importance and precedence by ensuring that we debate and take a vote on the incredibly important issue of ending barbaric practice of gender
Mr. Speaker.
modification of young children
Mr.
before
Moody, for what
ceremony.
purpose?
Mr. Speaker, I raise a point of order against further consideration of the Slaton Amendment under Article 3, Section 5 of the Texas Constitution on the grounds that it violates the procedures and order of business of the House of Representatives specified by the Texas Constitution.
Please bring your point of order down front.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment's pretty simple. In woke corporations and on Twitter, there's an unhealthy trend of people inserting their preferred pronouns in their bio signatures or signature. These kind of games should not be played in the Capitol, and this type of communication should not be occurring at taxpayer expense. The left is constantly moving the goalpost of what objective truth is. This amendment serves as preemptive defense of our members and staff. Essentially, I'm saying that they can't use these on their emails, at the bottom of their emails, and try to force people into their belief system. I move passage.
Mr. Slaton, for what purpose?
I'd like to ask the representative some questions.
The gentleman will yield for questions.
Yes, sir, I will.
The gentleman will yield.
Representative Tinderholt, I want to say thank you for filing this amendment.
Absolutely.
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Weiner, for what purpose?
I rise on a point of order under Rule 11, Section 2, that this amendment is not germane.
Please bring your point of order down front.